Coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. This week, we're doing part 3, the last part of our little mini-series on the sexual politics of Gilmore Girls. So in part 1, we covered virginity and virtue. Part 2, we talked a little bit more about adult sexuality and marriage and who was sex positive on the show. We're going to do a little bit more of that today. We're going to move on into sex positivity and objectification on the show. So stick around for that.
Yeah, this is going to be a juicy wrap up to this entire 3-part discussion that we've had. We're very excited about it. In the meantime, please do all those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, share this video with any of your friends. And if you had any comments about what we've talked about already, or if you have any comments on sex within the show, drop us a comment and let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Totally. We need your spicy takes, and we need them now. Okay, so you kind of posed this question to me in the last part, but I want to talk about it more fulsomely, and I want to throw it back at you because I don't think you maybe answered it. You asked me, and I gave my take, and it led us into another side of the conversation. So I'm going to start here once more. Is Gilmore Girls sex positive?
I feel like you were a bit more even-keeled with this in terms of saying yes and no, but the more I think about it, the more I need to say no. I feel like we get sex positive characters and sex positive situations and interactions, but on the whole, the way that this show just shies away from sex as being a positive thing, how it constantly throws it into the limelight of dangerous and bad repercussions stem from any sexual encounters, whether it's pregnancy or displeasure or, oh, I was just feeling an emotional void, or, oh, there was actually cheating involved. All truthful things within, the reality of sexual relationships and amongst people in the real world. But I feel like this show just is more often than not painting a picture that sex just leads to bad things, whether it's, again, emotional devastation, unwanted pregnancies, relationship ruiners, use of manipulation. Just, I don't feel like it puts it in a good light. And it's sad because I don't feel like, again, that's a truthful thing. There's a lot of positives that can come from sex, but I just feel like this show kind of skirts around it and just casts it in a negative light more often than not. So I would say no.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance to it. It's, like you said, there are a few characters that are a little more sex positive than others. And so that's where the general sentiment comes from when people look at it. They're like, oh, of course the show is sex positive. But there are deeper layers to be peeled back in terms of, input and outcome, shall we say, of when people are having sex, why they're having sex, and what the outcome of that is. And a lot of the time it is negative. It doesn't always portray sex in a light as, a wonderful part of human experience that, most people partake in with aplomb and delight. It doesn't really look at I don't really think it looks at the reality of sex as part of relationships and marriage. Like, it's there, but it's tangential. It's never like at the heart of healthy adult relationships and what it means for this couple to keep the love alive. It says nothing about sex as being a part of the well-being of the individual and the relationship. So I think it misses the mark a lot more than it hits it. Hits it. I'm an adult.
All the puns across these 3 episodes, but I'm here for it.
Yeah. Last night I was working on the notes doc for this. It ended up being 95 pages, but at one point it was 69. I was on a call with Dan when it happened, and I just sort of was hovering over the scroll bar on the side and was just randomly burst into laughter about it. And Dan was like, what? It was funny. But yeah, unfortunately, we lost that number because I kept adding notes because that's how I roll. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it does. It's not always a yes or no answer. There is nuance to it. But it leans anti-sexuality a little more than it leads pro-sexuality, just because of the nature of some of the character arcs and moments. So even though there may be some shining beacons of positivity, that's not enough to make a show overall sex positive. I mean, the whole premise of the show is that there was so much pressure on Rory to avoid the sexual mistakes of her mother that she ended up flailing, you know? It all started from a girl who was seen to have thrown her life away and to ruined, her family's very good name by having a child out of wedlock as a teenager, and all of the ensuing shenanigans of seeing what that resulted in with a teenager who was putting a lot of pressure on herself and was receiving a lot of pressure from the outside to be perfect all the time, which included not having sex. It was just very much so like, you're a good girl, therefore you do not have sex. And that carried with her not only through her teen years, but also even into her early adult years.
Which is exactly like, yes, if you're a good person in life, you will just never have sex and then die. That's exactly how it goes.
Yeah.
Would you say that there are any examples of sex positivity on the show amongst any of our characters or partnerships? And if so, can you highlight some of those? Especially, I would say, let's focus more, not so much on adolescents anymore, but like actual adults who are having healthy, positive sexual relationships.
Right. I talked about this in part 2 a little more. I do think on the whole, Lorelai is probably one of the most sex positive characters, because we see her embracing her sexuality and following her heart, following her desires, and receiving very little judgment for that, which is good. She gets the odd comment or just because she maybe regrets it after the fact doesn't mean she's sex negative. Like kind of accidentally sleeping with Christopher that first time in season 1. She was just like, oh, that was kind of a bad idea. I shouldn't have done that, but like, whatever. Stuff like that is a good example of how she is a good example, and the fact that she has an equal and happy sexual relationship with Jason in season 4. We don't get a ton of her sex life with Luke, but just enough to see that they seem to have a healthy dynamic there. We don't seem to have any issues with them in the bedroom, so that's good. Paris, in her adult years, ends up becoming more sex positive and more open about her own sexuality, more willing to embrace it. Trying to decide if the list ends there. And this is the problem with this question, because we have like some good examples. But as good as Lorelai is as an example of someone who made a quote unquote mistake in her teen years and had a negative, however you want to look at it, outcome of early sexual encounters, and as much as she took control of her own life and made the best of it and had the right attitude about self-determination and being a good mom, as much as she embraced all of this, the show undercuts itself by reverting to characters like Rory, who are coerced and shamed and deeply impacted by fears and negative views about sex. Is there anybody that I'm missing that you can think of who like actually has healthy stuff going on? Because I'm trying to blank.
No, I mean, I think that's the problem. There are so many instances of it just being like, nope, you shouldn't be doing that, or you should not have done that, or this isn't kosher for whatever reason. And it's sad. Like, I would hate for this show to be discouraging of young people, but also anyone in general, to explore sex and sexuality because they see like, oh, it just ends badly. And sometimes it does. Like, there's truth and reality to that. And it's sad. Like, that's honest. But it's not a blanket statement that all sex is bad or that all sexual relationships or interactions will end badly or have some of the outcomes that we see. It can certainly be a very wonderful and beautiful thing. And there are positives to it as well. So I wish the show balanced a little bit more in that regard in terms of just not dumping on it so much as something that results in so much negativity and leads to so much judgment from family and friends.
Yeah, I'm wondering what the point of it was too, because as I said, Lorelai in isolation could be held as a good role model for young women, especially those who find themselves in the difficult position of teen motherhood. She shows what you can accomplish even without a husband, without a familial support network, as long as you have grit and determination, which is a little problematic on its own. We'll talk about that some other time. But then they undercut that message by giving Rory such a complex about it. Like they have her first time be with a married man. They could have given her a more sex positive encounter for her first time. They could have made it something that Rory respects and that she treats with seriousness and gravity. I mean, like, I don't know that she doesn't necessarily, but just in the terms of like, because she waits so long for it to happen and she puts so much pressure on herself for it, and her relationships suffer. And so I'm wondering why the show does that. Is it to show that putting that kind of pressure on yourself will just lead to bad outcomes? Or are they just giving her bad outcomes because they want to turn her into Lorelai? I'm not sure what their end game was and what the point of giving Rory so many problematic sexual storylines was.
Yeah, I don't know either, because I don't want to feel like it hindered her for the rest of her life, but I feel like it definitely, like, her start into that foray was rough. I mean, even though she didn't end up sleeping with Jess, her first possible sexual encounter was stemming off of someone who was probably pushing her way too hard for the intimacy at that moment in time and made her largely uncomfortable. It's followed up by the first time she actually does it, and it's with a married man who is, again, I think they're both filling emotional voids at that moment in time, which is extremely volatile. Her first interactions into just any sort of sexual encounters, like probable or actual, were not healthy. And so how does that impact her down the line? But it made me want to just randomly ask you this too, real quick. Would you have preferred Rory's first sexual encounter to have been with Dean, as we saw it play out, or with the Wookiee as a representation of someone who is just a one-night stand for Rory, and that is that embodies and is emblematic of her first encounter? A one-night stand, #Wookiee, or Dean as a married man, but someone who she has known and loved for years?
That is not where I thought you were going to go with that. I thought you were going to be like Jess or Dean. We'll get to that in a little bit, maybe. Part of me wants to say Wookiee because I think it would have been nice for her to, like I said, obviously sex should, I mean, it doesn't always have to be taken like super duper seriously, but to see her have an experience where she's able to explore and there isn't as much pressure on the moment, because I think we build up the first time to be something that has to be magical. And I think maybe it's liberating for that not to be the case. And maybe Rory could have had an experience that maybe like took some of the fear out of it for her. I mean, I think that's part of the reason she leaned on Dean in season 4 was that sense of safety that he provided to her. And, in general, I support your first time being with somebody that you're very comfortable with, that you trust, and that is ideally committed to you. So, I mean, I'm not saying everybody should have their first time be a one-off with a stranger, but I think in Rory's particular case, there's so much history and so much baggage, both with her boyfriends and with sex in general. And it might have been liberating to her to like toss that off and be like, oh my God, the world didn't end. You know? So, oh, that's a tough one. What would your answer be?
I mean, I kind of am in line with you. I would hope that anyone's first, dive into a sexual encounter is, a committed one that is, stemming from actual attraction and a genuine desire for intimacy, and is not so banal as to say, I'm just looking to get my rocks off. There's nothing wrong with that. Let me say that now. There's nothing wrong with that. I just would hope that anyone's first time is a little more involved, so to say, and that it's a little more emotionally involved, as opposed to the physicality of it. But again, in Rory's case, she went into it, I think you said it perfectly, with so much baggage and expectations of what it should be like, what it could be like, that I think she almost defaulted to having her first, time be with Dean, because it's like, it should be with my first boyfriend and my first love, and he's going to do it best for my first time. And it's like, not necessarily, like, and actually this is probably the last thing that you should be doing right now. So I would say also with the Wookiee, just because I feel like she would be tied to it less, she could shake it off a lot easier, and she could just, then say, there aren't going to be any repercussions from this, but I also learned a lot about myself and what I like without any of those ties.
Yeah. Rory's so interesting because, again, with Lorelai, I wonder what they were doing with this. Lorelai could have been, again, such a good role model. And so to have Rory's early sexual experiences all be catastrophic, I'm like, what am I supposed to take from this? Am I supposed to take that, like, even a mom who's as sex positive and supportive as Lorelai, someone who can talk with her daughter about sex, is still going to have a daughter who is, left vulnerable and left, like, to have terrible sexual experiences. Like, if a mom like Lorelai can't have a daughter that has healthy sexual experiences, then what's the point of Lorelai being the cool mom who gets all the tea? Like, what is the point of that relationship? What's it supposed to be demonstrating to us about that kind of mother-daughter dynamic and its positive influence on kids, if all of Rory's, like, choices in sex and love are disastrous?
I really don't have an answer for you. And that's the thing too. Like, as much as this show, institutes this philosophy of apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I mean, look at the final 4 words. Hey mom, I'm pregnant. Granted, it's at, two very different times in their lives in terms of age. But I think we've said it before, the initial goal with that was to be that, the whole where you lead, I will follow. Rory is just falling into mom's footsteps, is getting pregnant with someone that she is not married to at this moment in time, would potentially raise this, child alone as a single parent to. But if we're trying to follow that philosophy and that mantra and say that Rory's sex life is just going to model Lorelai's, then show us that. But it doesn't. It is still night and day with these two women. Lorelai's is not always perfect, but it's a lot healthier. And Rory, time after time, is just falling into bed with men that she shouldn't be. And the results are just, well, that wasn't healthy. That wasn't healthy. That wasn't healthy. For the millionth time, again, Rory, what are you doing? Please get into a partnership with somebody that is actually going to be a good one. And I know you're Team Logan, but I feel like even with him, like the sex might have been great, but this relationship still needs so much work that can then translate to better sexual compatibility in the bedroom. And also, let's just, nix a lot of the cheating too. We'll get to that on the cheating episode. But again, I can't pinpoint a time where I was just like, actually, Rory, that was probably really good for you. Well done.
Well, no, I would argue that Logan was good for her. They seem to have immediate sexual chemistry from that first encounter where, might I add, Logan explicitly asked for her consent to continue twice and made sure that she was comfortable with the situation. And we don't really see them having problems until they're on a break. And, he looks for comfort in the arms of his sister's friends, which, isn't great. And again, we will have a more nuanced discussion about the ins and outs of that. Like, cheating starts next week. We're doing a 3-parter on that one, at least a 3-parter on that one too. Not sure which part it will fall into yet, but like soon. So there will be more nuanced conversation on that. But for the most part, like they lived together and they clearly had, a robust and healthy sex life. That wasn't what they were fighting about. That was never their problem. And I mean, obviously, yeah, their relationship took some work, and it was a little bit awkward at the beginning because Rory wasn't used to this sort of like emotional detachment from a sexual partner because she'd only had one so far and she'd had very intense relationships in her early years. And so to suddenly have a very sexually intimate relationship with someone with whom she doesn't have a long-standing emotional attachment or emotional commitment from was like, it triggered some attachment wounds in her, shall we say, and she didn't like it. And so she was about to extricate herself from the situation when Logan was like, no, actually, I want to keep you around. I like you a lot. I really want to see where this relationship goes. And so I think that was very healthy. And we like rarely ever saw them fighting about that or having issues in that department. So I would say not. My problem with Rory and Logan is actually everybody else's opinions about it. Like, she was a young adult and she was in a serious relationship. And like, well, I guess by the time Emily and Richard interfere, she's not living with Logan yet, but eventually she lives with him. And, they're serious. They've been dating for months. And suddenly everyone wants to get involved in her love life. I mean, everybody had opinions on Dean and Jess as well, but those were, the teenage boyfriends. And they were like, we have standards. You live up to them. You should expect other people to live up to them. Whereas Logan, it was more like, it was one of the few times that Lorelai seemed somewhat judgmental about Rory's choices. She didn't shame Rory for it or like try to talk Rory out of it. She just wanted to be sure that Rory was being safe, both physically and emotionally. But it was more just like, it's not like you, casual sex is not like you. Casual dating is not like you. Once again, sort of equating good girl Rory with lack of sex. And that her exploring that type of relationship and that side of herself is inappropriate for a girl of her moral standing. Didn't love that from Lorelai, but at least she kept her mouth shut about it and she accepted it. She let Rory make her own calls when it came to Logan. And then Emily and Richard butt in, and it's just like, again, she's a grown-up. She can make her own choices. Just because you think she's throwing her life away, it doesn't give you the right to interfere like that. And like, Rory's sex life was such a topic of discussion and consideration from everyone else that it was almost like she wasn't allowed to develop her own sexual identity kind of outside of these other connections and outside of the eyes of all the people who are looking out for her. It's all about like, we have to protect young girls. And then we end up with situations like this where those girls are brought to extremes by the pressures that they face and by, just the lack of information and support when it actually does happen.
Brava. I will say I have so many follow-up questions, but I also want to save them for the cheating episodes that we're about to do because I feel like they'll tie in really well there too, and they can be answered and be relevant in that regard. So I will just save those for those, but no, they're coming. You've just given me a lot more to throw at you that I'm going to think about, so get ready.
Interesting. I look forward to that.
Yeah. I kind of want to move us along to someone on the show that we haven't really talked about yet in terms of sexuality, but who I think we probably both agree is more problematic than not, Miss Patty.
Yep, I saw that coming.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of the sexual comments that she makes throughout all of the seasons, her views on sexuality, on relationships and men as she sees them. Is it good? Is it bad? Would you say that she is someone that is a role model as, an adult and someone who represents healthy sexual partnerships? Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've seen Miss Patty called a sex positive queen a lot on the internet. And I think more often than not, she actually leans more towards creepy, because a lot of the times her comments are inappropriate. There are moments when she's overtly sexual that are sex positive, and other moments where her unquenchable thirst crosses a line into predatory. I think one of her sex positive moments was actually in the episode with Fran's funeral, when she's crying on the bench and talking to Lorelai, and she's like, you know what, this makes you really appreciate life. And it's like, I'm so glad I had all that sex. Like that's a good moment where like she can look back and be like, I'm glad that I embraced my full self and that I took part in the pleasures of life and didn't like let myself be hemmed in by all these stupid external ideas about any of that. So that's a good one. But on the flip side, she makes a lot of comments where if they came out of the mouths of men, they would be incredibly awkward to watch, uncomfortable to hear, and would absolutely not fly today. Nobody would approve that script if it were Mr. Patrick. You know what I mean? Like, just like, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Patty. I love you. But no bueno. I'm gonna pull it out for you in this moment.
I don't have my red flag with me, but I feel like I am a giant red flag.
I will take it at this moment in time. It's good to commentate on how you have enjoyed your previous sexual encounters, that you can appreciate having sex on the whole and the positives that it can do. But when you have someone like Dean walking by and you're just, throwing things at him like, oh, I there's a comment about climbing, and it just makes me think to like Melissa McCarthy's comment in Bridesmaids, where she's like, oh, I wished he was single, like, or something. Like, I don't remember the exact thing, but it's like, oh, I hope he's single because I'm gonna climb him like a tree. And Miss Patty makes a similar comment to Dean, where she's like, oh, get any taller and I'd have to mountain climb, just to reach you. And it's like,
ugh. He's 17.
Like, yeah, I mean, even if like Rory said that, I'd be like, girl down, like, but just
someone get the hose. Yeah. It's gonna be Mrs. Kim. We know it's gonna be Mrs. Kim.
Oh my gosh, I want
cold showers.
I want an outtake of that right now of just Mrs. Kim just hosing down the entire town and be like, stop.
That scene from Secrets and Loans where she's like got the hose, but just applied to
everybody. Just needs to cool it in this town. Y'all are nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, as an older woman who is much, much older than Dean at this moment in time, you cannot be saying things like that. Even if she said it to someone who, like, if you said it to someone your own age, it's like, even still then potentially out of place if you're not in a partnership with that person, because then there's a real objectification that's going on. But this is a teenager. How does that stand? It was never okay. That's so just wildly inappropriate. And it just really makes Miss Patty seem, again, like you said, predatory, where it's like, if it looks good and it's effable, I'm going to comment on it. And it's like, nope, not okay.
Yeah, she she says a lot of inappropriate things, and some of them are directed at minors. And I also think of the moment at Suki's wedding when Lorelai's like, yeah, once Patty hits the hooch, we're going to have to hide Dean. And it's like, he's barely 18. Barely. When that, or no, I think he was 17 at that point. I think later when she makes the mountain climbing one, he's like 17, 18. Not entirely sure when his birthday is. So we're not quite sure. But it has that sense of like, he turned 18 yesterday. He's fair game now. Ugh. No. And then, yeah, it's rough. She tells that when she's doing the Founding of Stars Hollow story for the like little kid story time, she's like, who wants to hear about the time I danced in a cage for Tito Puente? Like, telling a story about cage dancing to young children. I'm like, what? And again, played off for laughs, and part of me finds it amusing, especially like the kids probably don't understand it, but that doesn't make it appropriate. Mm-hmm. But yeah, even with adults, she's inappropriate. Like when the Dragonfly has its test run and Lorelai tells her to follow her door and the construction worker goes up with it, she's like, you first, sweetie. And then she just like, she literally has one of those fans and she opens it up and fans herself and is just like, just staring at him, looking at his butt as he walks up the stairs. And yeah, the only other time I can think of that she's a little more like positive is her date with Jesus. Like that's an age appropriate, time appropriate thing where it's just like Patty has a date. Like, she can still get it. Like that's pretty solid. But it's so drowned out by flirting with unavailable men like Chris and Richard, and minors. And just like, no, like women regaining their sexual agency and flipping the script on objectification in this way is not good feminism. And it's not really funny at the end of the day when you really think about it. Like adopting toxic male traits isn't the way to destroy the patriarchy. So she's not really someone we should be looking up to as a sex positive feminist icon, because she's basically like, if Patty were a dude standing on the sidewalk watching a bunch of women complete a job, we would be castigating her. But because she's a woman watching men construct the soda shop, it's just like, you go, girl. No, not okay. Yep. That's really messed up. It's not the way to advance the cause of women at all.
No, I agree. And I will just say you're absolutely right. Like, there needs to not be a double standard there. If we're going to, call out men on this bad behavior and say, like, that is toxic objectification that does so much harm, we need to call out women on the same. And Miss Patty was doing that. It was not okay. Again, just flag on the play. But I also want to just...
Also, quick thing before we move on from Patty. Try a plum. They're better than sex.
Okay. I've actually had plums and not a fan. So...
and will not corroborate that statement.
Yeah, I will negate that every day of the week. Fan of plums over there, or still like, nah?
I mean, like, they're fine, but I don't know why she would say they're better than sex. And especially say that to a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah. Again, fair enough.
And then encourage her to objectify Dean in the same way that she does. Just not Patty's best moment. Nope. Oh, and then she kind of objectifies Kirk in the same scene.
Yeah. I was about to say, there is a lot of objectification on this show. There's also objectification. This better not turn into like my generational word where I can just no longer say this. But there is a lot of that within the show, but also behind the scenes that we unfortunately have heard played out as these scenes were being filmed.
Wait. I'm not done with Patty.
Okay, then keep going on Patty.
Well, I'm sort of done with Patty, but I am not done with Babette, because they are partners in crime on this, and I don't want to skip over her and move on to this other stuff yet. So often they are objectifying people together. Multiple times this happens. Sometimes it's just Babette, sometimes it's just Patty. Like there's that one scene in Lorelai's bachelorette party where Babette's like, stick your hand down the front of some guy's pants for me, would ya? I hope you're talking about a stripper. Whatever. Like, so just encouraging people to essay randos for no good reason because it's a bachelorette party. Like, okay. So that's just one of Babette's lone ones. There's another one where she sees Max Medina the night of Cinnamon's wake. And, you know, she's like, basically like, tell me how he is in bed. And Lorelai's like, I'll call you after the cigarette. Lorelai's talking, same episode, Lorelai's talking to her about, you know, whether a man would ever want her. And Babette's like, please, with that ass, give me a break. But, you know, with Patty, there's that time when, like, it's after Lorelai proposes to Luke and they're sitting around talking about it. And Patty's like, she proposed? And then Babette responds with, well, thank God he's got a good ass. And then in the revival, it continues. 2016, we should have learned our lesson. These women are in their 70s. And they, oh, wait, I forgot another Babette one. I have like a whole list of these quotes, guys. This is messed up. When Gil comes and she's like, I got dibs on the new hunk. He's like a long-haired cake. You know, she's married, he's married, and he's younger than her. Not by as much, and he's like a full-grown adult, so it's less creepy, but like, again, still pretty inappropriate. And then in the revival, when they're doing the play, or the musical, and Kevin, the hot black guy, skipping right over the racial implications of all of this, when he signs up for the musical, Patty stares at him and calls him Mr. Tall, Dark, and Yowza. And then Babette says, instead of calling him Kevin, she'll call him Tomorrow. And then they tell Lorelai and Rory that they're coming up to them in that moment was a total clam jam. Again, as if you guys aren't, well, Babette specifically, married. And just way older than this guy. He's like got to be in his 20s, and they are not. They are much older than him. Just, my God. But again, the difference between them, I think, is that, you know, Babette is coded differently. She's not viewed as the same kind of sex positive queen because she's married. So she has this sort of like matronly, motherly air about her that Patty lacks in a certain way. And also, Miss Patty is Latina. And so there's always been a lot of issues with stereotyping and hypersexualizing Latinas, Asians, and other African Americans, and other races that are not white. So there's a little bit of that sort of like super low level, almost like racial bias that, of course, Miss Patty is thirsty because she's Latina, whereas Babette is like a nice, respectable white woman, and like whatever inappropriate sexual things come out of her mouth are totally fine because she's not a threat. She's not anything to worry about. Okay, but speaking of Babette and Patty saying that Luke has a good ass, go.
On what planet, again, is this okay? If it's going to be, we got to call a spade here. We can't allow women to stand by and be like, he's got a great ass, or, you know, oh, look at those pecs, or like those biceps, I'd crush him, whatever, just sexualized comments you want to make, but then allow and say like, that's okay. She's just trying to get hers. But then have men stand on the sidewalk and be like, well, look at the rack on her. Look at her behind, you know, XYZ, whatever crude comment you want to throw out there, use your imagination. We can't allow for it to be okay on one side of the equation and then, you know, just completely obliterate the other side and say like, how dare you? That's objectification. Like it's problematic. It's, you know, borderline abusive, if not abusive on its whole. There needs to not be such a split. And we just need to say like, it's wrong no matter who is doing it, no matter what gender is doing it, no matter who is doing it to whom, we've got to call it like we see it. And this show does not do it within the show. But again, there are also things that we want to talk about that unfortunately have come out as the show is being filmed, where actors and actresses on the show felt that way too, just as a part of the job. And none of it was ever okay. I know we've talked a little bit about it already within the context of the show. I don't know if you want to still keep going on with that, or if you want to talk about how some of these actors actually felt as they were embodying the characters, and kind of split away and look at the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, I want to talk about Scott and his story of the butt scene in Keg Max when he's fixing the stove at the Independence Inn, and Suki accidentally grabs his ass and is telling Lorelai about it, and then they're objectifying his butt. So, talk to me about that.
Scott has made it very clear on his podcast, and I feel like I've seen several mentions of it, where he felt like he was being objectified, and it made him largely uncomfortable. Perhaps at the time, he overlooked it because this is your job. You think like, I'm contracted to do this. I need to not create waves or say anything because I could lose this job. That's a sad reality, I think, not just even within the acting field, but with any sort of job environment. I feel like, how many times have we heard or read about things in the news? Again, mainly within the acting field, but in any capacity where it's like, oh, I never called out my employer on SA because I was afraid of losing my employment. That is a very real and tragic and horrendous thing, which can even go beyond that. I don't even want to think about that or go there. But
this is why we have Me Too and Time's Up.
Yeah. But in Scott's regard, he was made to feel violated. And the second that any person says that they feel that way, it needs to be validated. It can't be dismissed. It needs to be looked into. Now, without trying to discredit anybody, if I were to shake your hand, Kate, and you say like, because I'm trying to greet you, and you say, oh, I feel validated, I'll ask you why. If you don't want me to shake your hand ever again, I won't. But like, there needs to be consideration. But in this regard, when it was very clear, a clear-cut case of like, you're touching someone's part of their body that is considered essentially to be an off-limits private part, it's made them feel violated. It's made them feel uncomfortable. You can't dismiss that and say it's a part of the job. They're overreacting, XYZ. You need to look at that and say, no, this made this person feel this way. Their feelings are valid. What can we do to make this better? But in Scott's regard, it was just, I think especially because he was a guy, it's like, oh, no harm, no foul. Like, we just touched his butt. Not a big deal. What do you think about it?
I mean, I don't think they actually touched his butt. It was more like the conversation around it. And yeah, it's sort of like assumed to be okay and funny and edgy because it's aimed at a man. Again, with the idea of flipping the script and taking historically masculine traits like objectification and catcalling and inappropriate touching and all of that, and transposing it onto like a female doing it to a male, flipping that script. Again, not the right way to go about that. Doesn't make it okay. And just because Scott didn't fear for his physical safety in that time, like, it's a controlled environment, there's lots of people around, but that doesn't necessarily make it better because there's all these people there who are objectifying him. The whole focus of that scene is on his butt now, whether or not it actually gets touched. And so, if you think about it, that joke had to be written, approved. It had to go through like all of these stages. They had to go through table reads where that line was said over and over and over again. They had to do multiple takes. Apparently he was saying that talk about it was happening between takes as well. So it was just like that scene probably took the better part of a day to film. And so to think that for like the better part of an entire working day, you're just subject to people constantly talking about and objectifying one of your like private parts, one of your like sexualized parts, is very messed up. And, you know, I have a quote from him from his podcast here where he said, like, okay, so Amy and Dan wrote this episode, and color me completely unsurprised by that fact. But he said, this is how the creator of that show sees that character, that you can humiliate him and take away his dignity that entire scene. And that's okay. And that wasn't okay with me. You know, it's just, this had to happen in front of like his boss, his showrunner, studio executives. All of these people were sort of a part of this process, and it still made it all the way through. And I'm glad he eventually spoke up about it and said, hey, this isn't okay. It wasn't okay then. It's not okay now. You know, I'm not a meat stick, basically. And I don't think it would have flown. Like, what if it was Lorelai's ass? That scene never would have been written. Nobody would have ever thought it was okay to objectify Lauren Graham's ass that much, that directly. Like, I mean, a lot of people like say, with that ass, you know, back to Babette. But it's just sort of like one-off quick comments as opposed to an entire scene that had like multiple takes, right? But it just, you know, it shows that there's still a lot of inequality in the way we think about these things. And, you know, that men can be victims of sexual harassment and SA and all of these things as much, and it impacts them just as deeply as it does women. So it's just, the whole thing is gross.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how much more you need or want us to elaborate on it, but I think we both collectively can just say like none of that was ever okay. And the takeaway needs to be that it needs to be just completely unbiased in terms of gender. Like, it is never okay for one person to do that to another, no matter how you identify. The objectification just needs to stop.
It's true. And I mean, again, I feel like it crosses over into other areas as well. Like, for example, when the Dragonfly is doing its first official sexual harassment seminar, and then Michelle is the one who's like, hey, say something about this. And Lorelai's like, sexual harassment is bad. No one touch anyone in any funny places unless specifically asked. Moving on. And that was it. And then Michelle was like, what about not ogling other people like an object of desire? How about explaining that the way some people walk with a sway or a bounce, it's natural. It's because we work out and we take Pilates. No one touch Michelle. Moving on. Like, Michelle's, you know, sense of being ogled as a sexual object is brought out. And once again, he's a man who was shut down by a woman for a joke, for a punchline. It's just like, this is how we handle this like serious topic that actually affects people. We make a joke out of it and we move on breezily.
Yeah. I mean, this is why HR exists within companies, hopefully for a reason. But that's where, like, again, damn, Lorelai, like, get it, just do better. Just do better. Michelle is obviously voicing a concern to you, something that makes him feel uncomfortable. I don't care who those stares are coming from. Maybe he even feels it's coming inadvertently from Lorelai sometimes, and he just is too afraid to say it. But he's like, people within my place of employment are looking at me in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm trying to communicate that right now, and your response is sweep it under the rug. No one talk to him. Can we move on with our day?
Yeah, stop doing it. That's all you need to hear from me. It's like as if that's actually going to do anything.
Yeah.
But I think we'd also be remiss if we didn't talk about these things happening to the actors in real life. Just the gross objectification in reviews of the show specifically. I think it was like the cultural history of television or something. There's a book I was reading and it had a whole Gilmore Girls slant to it. And they talked about or quoted some stuff in it about reactions to the show in the early years from male critics that are just gross. And I want to read them for you and for our dear listeners, just so that we can all be outraged together. How about that?
Yeah.
Rolling Stone's Joe Levy said, Lauren Graham has Comic timing so deft that she can get a laugh out of a straight line. Plus, she wears jeans really well. Speaking of objectifying people's butts.
Vomit.
This dude did it in Rolling Stone, and somehow that made it past an editor.
Well, yeah, because he's a dude, Kate.
Oy vey. And Esquire's A.J. Jacobs calls Lorelai and Rory quite hot, and then says, and men, in case I didn't make the hot actress point sufficiently clear, this is a show worth watching even if the sound is muted. Especially now that Rory, played by the stunning Alexis Bledel, is out of high school and you can leer at her without feeling like you should be chemically castrated.
I would like to rage.
Yeah, that triggers barbarian mode. I would like to frenzy, because wow, that is just so gross. Like, male journalists admitting that they feel embarrassed about watching the show for anything other than the hot lead actresses. As if good writing and female relationships aren't enough to keep people interested, especially men. I don't want to live on this planet anymore. Yeah. Bad. So bad.
Yeah. The spaceship meme. Just get me out of here.
Yeah. Where's the eject button?
Deep space has to be better than this.
You know what I want to do? I want to put those two guys, and maybe, like, there's probably more examples just like them. I want to put them on that, like, inappropriately shaped spaceship that Elon Musk took to space and just be like, bye. We'll keep this planet and we'll send them off.
Noted for creation purposes. I don't do editing well at all.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway, I have at least one more topic that I want to talk about when it comes to inappropriate objectification and moralizing of sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take a stab at what it is?
Female sex workers.
Oh, yeah.
Go off.
Well, I'll just start off by saying that Dan Palladino wrote an entire episode based on a big prostitute joke.
I'm listening. I signed up for this TED Talk.
Yeah, TEDx TGW. Yeah, that whole episode. Again, pulled the quotes because they're relevant. So it's a bunch of middle-aged white men sitting around a table talking about what to call a woman who used her sexual wiles to distract a military general so that the American revolutionaries could win a decisive battle there in Connecticut. Oh, God. Okay, here we go. So Andrew suggests streetwalker. Taylor, too urban. Concubine, seems highfalutin. And then Reverend Skinner's like, anyone seen Farewell, My Concubine? Beautiful film. Gorgeous cinematography. And then Taylor's like, I'm surprised you see such adult fare, Reverend. Well, do you picture me watching The Sound of Music every night? Gag me. And I'm like, oh boy, okay. Scarlet Woman, too Nathaniel Hawthorne. Harlot, nah. Woman of accommodating morals, too long. Hot mutton, I wouldn't know where to begin. Oh, God. And then, a hooker stopped a battle. We're not calling her a hooker. To Beretta. We're trying to figure out what the hell to call her. Bit of stuff. To Monty Python. She should be thin, but not too thin. Know anyone who fits the bill? Not offhand, but if I run into any moderately weighted whores in my travels, I'll let you know. Yikes. And also, can I just say, like, we don't know that this woman was actually a sex worker. She could have been anyone who was like, you know what, I have an idea. And used her sexual attractiveness as a means to distracting this military general. And I'm like, does that make her a sex worker? You tell me.
I think it makes her cunning and I want to use my words carefully here. Geniusly deceptive in a way that is consensual to her, hopefully consensual to the man. But if that was ever how it played out, and she's just like, I probably know what this man wants. I think I can consensually seduce him, and I will do so with full regards to my own biological nature. And, you know, again, consensuality and everything is above board. It's deceptive, but okay. Like, okay. I mean, again, I don't know. Like, that's such a weird situation. Why are we having to theorize about this?
I don't know, but I have the perfect thing for this moment. The simple, common woman whose livelihood defied laws of morality, but acting in a fashion which God would forgive her, led the British general to the warmth of her boudoir. She saved Stars Hollow.
And then you just see the Reverend just completely losing it. And the kids need to be like, Reverend.
I will admit that the joke of it being Kirk in the end is hysterical.
Yeah.
But the way that we got there with like Taylor actually holding auditions where there's a sign outside that just says girl, you know, infantilizing her for one. And then again, having a middle-aged white man judge women based on their looks for the role of an historical sex worker. What dimension did we get shipped to with this episode? But, you know, it's just like the young heroine of our story didn't think of the cold when she gave up her greatest treasure for her country. Yet again, that whole like, your virtue is a gift and you can't re-gift it. You only get one shot at sexuality. Better make it a good one, unless you're a sex worker, and then we're going to mercilessly taunt you. So, yeah, just... What? Great, now I'm not even the town whore.
The whole scene, even how it just comedically ended with Rory and Lorelai being like, so how long do you think Taylor's going to let this go on? Where he's like, I don't know, but like, I'm here for it. I'm going to stay and find out. Wow. Just wow.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And like I said, in a way it's funny, and like the build up and the punchline, the build up is gross. The punchline is funny. But it speaks to a larger pattern I've noticed of jokes made at the expense of sex workers. I did something recently. So I have every transcript of every episode except the revival because it's not really transcribed properly. But I pulled them all for when we were making our Gilmore's Against Humanity game. And so what I did was I took all of them and I made season mega transcripts. I figured it might make things easier to search. Although I seem to have run across some issues in terms of like, there were quotes I was looking for or that I knew happened in a particular season that the search like navigation function of Word would not pull up. So I'm like, I might even be missing some. But there was pretty much a reference to like a joke about a sex worker in every season, often multiple ones. You know, even like the episode where Rory goes on like the first date with Dean and Kiss and Tell. And Lorelai's like, let's focus on you, the lady of the evening. No hooker reference intended. Talking to her own 16-year-old daughter. There's at least 2 inappropriate jokes about women in Thailand.
Yep, remember those.
Yeah. Speaking of star-crossed lovers and other strangers, the town of Stars Hollow probably got its name from the local dance hall prostitute. Emily in There's the Rub, and she's like, I certainly don't eat at bars. Hookers eat at bars. The talk about strippers in like during Dean's bachelor party scene, And Kyle's like, are they really prostitutes? Because I'd feel bad if they were prostitutes. The Jason comment about nothing bonding two businessmen more than finding one of them hungover with a hooker in their bed the next morning. You just know they flew in the top prostitutes from Hong Kong to work that coat check at the China Garden. Obviously, the only prostitutes have 2 glasses of wine at lunch. Buy me a boa and drive me to Reno. Babette, you look all dolled up and walk in the street. I'm not calling you a hooker or nothing. Then there's the conversation between Lorelai and Chris at Lane's first Buddhist wedding when he's asking why she had to bring a man. And she's like, because an unmarried woman alone of a certain age, dressed the way I dressed, apparently is Korean for Jenna Jameson.
Oh.
Yeah. That's 619. So, and I think that was an ASP episode. I don't think I came up with any specifically for season 7. And I'm like, wonder why.
Was someone else helming the show at that point?
I don't know. You tell me.
Maybe. Oh. Well, that's
almost
a horse of a different color.
Yeah. I mean, not every quote I just referenced was in a script written by Amy or Dan, but like half of them were directly in their episodes. And we know that every script passed through Amy's hands. And I'm sometimes wondering if she's like, you know what? Not enough hooker jokes this season. I'm just going to add a little bit of spice to this with one of these. And I'm like, oh, God. I don't know. I feel like those jokes really don't fly anymore. And it's one of the things that hasn't held up about the show over time. But yeah, like they throw it in for no good reason. Like there's no rationale where this is a necessary thing. But attitudes have changed so much even since then about, how we view sex work to begin with. But I think it shows what we're working with here when it comes to the writers and the producers and what they think makes for good comedy and what segments of society are worthy of our derision.
Yeah. I mean, there are certainly shows that are written to push boundaries and offend and know that they are probably purposefully offending. I mean, number 1 on that list is probably South Park. Like they
Yes.
know every single week. It's just like, you're gonna annoy the F out of somebody and just offend somebody. But like, that's their social commentary. It's only, that's their goal, as sad as it is. But like, they know it's like, we're writing to offend here. We know this is messed up. That's what we're going to do. I mean, that's South Park for you. But like, that's not what we have here. So the question for Amy and Dan then becomes, it's like, are you doing this knowing that you are purposefully going to offend and you're sitting in your chairs okay with it because you're getting your paycheck nonetheless? Or are you that ignorant? I don't know which one is worse.
Yeah, it's true. I don't want to say ignorant, but I don't know. Again, I think they definitely tend to prefer that humor that takes digs at people. And it's totally possible to have like laugh out loud funny stuff that doesn't do that. And again, I know that they're smart enough to not do that. There are some very cleverly structured jokes that have nothing to do with that. I'm like, why couldn't we have more of that? Again, if this is supposed to be family friendly, why are we talking about sex work? I mean, I know that they don't have any pull on the show after the pilot necessarily, but like, again, the networks at the time were pretty strict on that. And again, all the shit was run by the network. Like, and again, there are so many levels that these jokes have to pass. And, it still happens in certain contexts where I'll see something and be like, again, who thought that was a good idea and approved that? It makes more sense 20 years ago, but like also, I don't know. Sometimes, again, mixed messages. Amy, are you sex positive or not? And I mean, again, the question of sex positivity and sex work is very nuanced and very difficult to parse out. But it just, again, feels like, in this case, yeah, kind of ignorant. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Sex work is gross, just based on very superficial and stereotypical ideas about what it entails and about the people who engage in it. But Yeah, I'm always confused by, 1 minute they're making jokes about Republicans and putting Bush down, and in the next they're, making fun of sex workers and using some other problematic tropes as a way to advance character arcs. And again, makes me wonder whether it's ignorance or commentary. There are several moments where I'm literally just not sure. I'm like, I don't know.
Amy, Dan, if you're watching this,
come on the podcast and explain yourself.
Give us the answer. Yeah, we'll hear your side. We'll probably fight you on some of it, but come at us. We'd love to have you on.
They will totally come on here because we haven't shit talked them in the past, and we won't shit talk them in the future.
Never.
I don't have an entire episode planned on death of the showrunner that mostly critiques Amy.
Nope, but that's why you got to keep coming back week after week and joining us, folks, because as much as we are huge Gigi stans, we're not afraid to call out our favorite show on its own ish. And that's what I think makes us good podcast hosts.
Yeah,
I think horns just a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to engage critically in the things that you love, because if you don't, then you're just going to end up in an echo chamber. And even the things we love aren't perfect most of the time, except Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is perfect. Actually, that's not even true. It's not perfect. But,
well, thoughts on that will come soon as well.
Thoughts coming in January on Ted Lasso and its comparisons to Gilmore Girls, because there's more than you would think. But yeah, it's always good to look at the things that you love with an analytical eye. I actually feel like I love Gilmore Girls now more than ever, even with my disdain for certain decisions that were made by the writers at certain points. So like, don't shy away from criticism just because you love something. Think about it deeper, because it's important work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we do this for free.
Yeah. I think that's a really great spot to end us off on this one, unless you have any other final thoughts. We'll get more into, everything that we didn't address in our next series of episodes on cheating going forward. But I think that's a good place to wrap this one up here. Again, unless you have anything else you want to close us out on.
I will just once again reiterate that I had 95 pages of notes for this. And this is our third episode in a series. We recorded for over 3 hours on this, and we still didn't cover everything. And so there's still more to say on certain topics. We hardly touched on any depth with the Rory and Jess situation in season 3 in Kyle's bedroom. There's a lot about Rory and her relationships with Dean and Logan as it pertains to like her sexual arc. So there's still so much to say. We do have some episodes planned for a few months from now in terms of Rory's whole arc and all of her relationships. So that stuff will probably kind of get supplanted there. And as Lorelai, you're not Lorelai, you're Laura.
Close enough.
Again, we're into our 3rd hour of recording. So if I seem a little loopy, I am. Yeah. So as Laura alluded to, and I alluded to earlier, next week, it's cheating. We're talking about it. Again, I have 70, 80, 90 pages of notes somewhere in there so far, and I'm not even done yet. I'm not even all the way through State of Affairs right now. Esther Perel is my girl, and I will be bringing you some delicious nuggets from her books, realistically. So we're gonna talk about it all. Just there's so much cheating on the show. But there's also a lot of like real world stuff and comparisons to other properties that I really want to engage in, because it's just one of these things that's so pervasive in media and it's so common in real life. And there's a lot to look at when it comes to that, and to compare how Gilmore treats it and the way we talk about what happens on the show and why we talk about it that way. So I am very, very excited. This is one of the earliest, I think, documents I created when we started talking about this podcast. I was like, oh, this is going to be a biggie. And I was not wrong. And so we're finally getting there. It feels like a perfect spin-off from this. We're just going to kind of continue on with this like really juicy relationship stuff and sexual morality, I guess, if you think about it. So a little bit of a different take on it, but Yeah, get ready for that.
Yeah, I cannot tell that you are excited whatsoever.
No.
My excitement is there. It's probably a little bit more contained right now, but just brace yourselves, folks. It's there.
I've had a lot of coffee.
Yeah, coffee.
Coffee.
But I'm just gonna steal from one of your favorite, lawyers on the law tube, sort of thing. Not only do I have questions, but I have thoughts. We both have lots of thoughts.
I love that I've introduced you to Emily D. Baker, and you stand her with me now.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Come back and join us for that. That will probably, I say probably, but like definitely be several episodes as well, as we just dissect all of that amongst the show and how it relates to actual interactions and reality. We're diving deep, folks, and we just hope that you will join us along the way. In the meantime, do the things, go back and watch some of our old episodes. We hope that this, latest series on, sex and objectification and, how people are viewed in that regard, the decisions that they make within, their own sexual encounters in their lives has been hopefully enlightening to you. If you have any thoughts, drop us a comment and let us know anything that you would like us to talk about down the line. We can always circle back on. And please always just do those YouTube things for us. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, share it with your family and friends who love Gigi, or who even just want to, perhaps listen into what is, I think, a really worldly and still relevant conversation that we all need to be having.
Yeah. Please drop your hot takes in our comment section. Tell us where we're wrong. Tell us where we're right, where you agree, where you disagree. We want to hear from you.
Yep. And just come back and join us next Friday night for dinner. We promise this next series is going to be probably even more lively than this one. And this one was spicy enough. So we're just, we're hot wings. Like, I just think of like the hot wings show. It's just like, we're just getting to like, upping the Scoville units. It's about to get real up in here.
It's ghost peppery right now. And we're about to get to, what is that like top one?
I think it is the ghost pepper.
Is it?
Or the Carolina Reaper.
Carolina Reaper. That's the one. I was like, what's it called? I am a bitch when it comes to spice. I think I cap out at like jalapeno. I'm really not super familiar with the Scoville units specifically. But yeah, it's like hot ones up in here. And it's about to get hotter. So come back for that. Yep. And in the meanwhile, stay spicy.
Yep. And we will see you next Friday night for dinner with wings.
Bye. I'm not doing the hot ones challenge with you because 1, bitch with spice, 2, vegetarian. So
fair enough. Take care, you guys. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.